The panel 2 will be looking at senses of direction towards Black Canadian study departments. Our moderator is Dr. Nathan Andrews. This session will collectively examine our diverse aims, what we would like to ultimately accomplish, and where we would like to collectively go in our effort to develop Black Study Initiative in our respective institutions. The panelists are Dr. Claire Thompson, Dr. Motilola Akinfemisoye-Adejare, Dr. Natasha Henry-Dixon, Dr. Alana Butler, and my role model, of course, Dr. Nathan Andrews. Dr. Nathan Andrews, please.
Thanks so much for hanging out with us today, and thank you, Hosea, for that wonderful description of the panel and the introduction. I'll call on my panelists to come along. We don't have so much time, so we're going to start soon. And like you mentioned, my name is Nathan Andrews. I am an associate professor in political science. And I mean, being in political science is an interesting intersection with this conversation, because it's like, how do you do Black studies in political science? I mean, I'll get more into that, but I just want to introduce myself briefly. And I think the panelists, as they settle in, would also get a chance to introduce themselves. But like Hosea was saying at the beginning, the goal of this panel is to look at sort of the diverse aims that we have, the diverse ways that we come into Black studies, and where we're going, where we're seeking to go. Sorry, I'm talking as they set up because we don't have a lot of time. And also sort of looking at the various initiatives at institutions that we all come from, and how maybe it intersects with this sort of broader vision of where Black Canadian studies will look like. The focus here is actually on Black Canadian studies department, if a department like that should exist, or if it exists, and what the makeup of that department could look like. And whether we sort of lose something by maybe conceptualizing it as a single department, or we should think about it as maybe a much more broader interdisciplinary field of study that is not housed in a single place or a single site of knowledge mobilization and dissemination. So I hope that's a good description, and I know you probably were not paying attention as you were setting up, but I think we can begin by having you maybe briefly introduce yourself and how you come into Black studies. I know we're coming from different departments and different programs, so maybe we can start with that, and then we'll start with some questions. So please go ahead.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I always like to scan a room, and it's great to see familiar faces and many new faces I would love to engage later. I am Motilola Akinfemisoye-Adejare, and I'm an assistant professor in the African Studies program in the Faculty of Arts at the University of Calgary. And I have this fun job of teaching a variety of courses in the program. For research, I am a media studies scholar. My research really lies at the intersection of digital technologies and the media practices of journalists in Africa. I ask whether these new technologies are changing, shaping, rewriting, challenging, what have you, the institutional practices of journalists. I also write about women politicians in Botswana. Botswana is a context that's very close to my heart, having lived there for 5 years when I worked at the University of Botswana. And so I love writing about these women, because reading the newspapers told me a different story. More recently, though, I am now researching on what it means to teach an anti-Black racism in North America course in a Canadian classroom, and that's super exciting.
Thank you so much, Alana.
Okay, hopefully everyone can hear me. My name is Alana Butler, and I'm an associate professor in the Faculty of Education at Queen's University. And first of all, I actually want to thank the organizers too, Dr. Alpha Baby and Dr. Rhonda George, who organized this, and also for inviting me, because I think this is a wonderful space and it's a wonderful opportunity to have a chance for us to engage this way. So my research, I think, even stemming from my doctoral work, I looked at Black student experiences in Canada and the United States. So I went to Cornell University for my PhD, and I did a comparative study So that was something that was interesting to me from my doctoral work, I was sort of grounded in Black studies. And when I started at Queen's University in 2017, I came in with a research project that I worked on with some researchers from TMU, Dr. Beverly Daniel, and Dr. Rachel Berman about can we talk about race? In addition to that, most of my research focuses on looking at Black and racialized students and their access to post-secondary education. I'm part of a partnership grant on African immigrant resilience, which is, that's a really large team and very exciting. And also doing some current work with Dr. Roberta Timothy, who does work in Black health. So I'm part of the research advisory team, and I also work with her on a number of research projects. So one of the things that's interesting is like the interdisciplinarity of it all, which I hope we'll get into, is because I'm in education and I'm working with folks in health and different areas like that in medicine. So I think that's really important to think about how we can work across disciplines in Black studies. And again, I'm also working with Dr. Beverly Daniel on another health-related project. So, yes,
thank you so
thank
much,
you.
Dr. Henry-Dixon.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Natasha Henry-Dixon. I'm an assistant professor of African Canadian history at York University. And my background is around the documenting and sharing of rich, diverse Black history in Canada. I do so as a historian, but also as an educator, developing curriculum materials to support teachers and students in learning more about Black history in Canada. And I'm the immediate past president of the Ontario Black History Society. And so for me, maybe I'll be a bit biased, but I think history is a core anchor of Black Canadian studies. And so I do, what I can in order to continue to strengthen that.
Thanks so much. We have our speaker online, Dr. Cheryl Thompson. Can you please describe what you do briefly, maybe just a bit about yourself?
Yes, I will. Thank you. First of all, I really wanted to be there in person today, so I apologize for my virtual presence. It's interesting because this is an interesting panel that I find myself on, because I don't describe myself as an educator or a historian. And I do both. So I sort of see myself as a communicator of the Black experience. And I do the same thing in the classroom as I do in my work. But my official title is that I'm an associate professor of performance at Toronto Metropolitan University. I have a PhD in communication studies from McGill University, and then I held a Banting postdoctoral fellow at the University of Toronto in theater, drama, and performance studies. And so all of that has sort of like culminated in about 15 years of time that I spent working in archives. And that archival work is what led to Mapping Ontario's Black Archives, otherwise known as MOBA, which is a project that seeks to sort of make publicly accessible in a one-stop shop all the Black collections across the province. And to date, that project has mapped 94 collections, around 5,700 records in the public archive that we hope to make publicly accessible via the MOBA project website. But what I really aim to do, and I know, Natasha, people in history are like, come on now, call yourself a historian. But I refuse to do that, because I'm really not a historian. I'm trying to, I would almost call it time travel, like to go back into time and to imagine life from the vantage point of people who lived in that time, so that I could bring it forward into the future. So it's like, I've realized over the last few years that I'm kind of an Afrofuturist, doing historical and contemporary work and trying to imagine both sides of that coin. What was it like to live in the 19th century? To be honest, they're asking the same questions in the 19th century that we're still asking today. So that's kind of my work in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thompson. So we will zoom right into the first question, and it's really about the programming of Black studies in your respective institutions. Maybe you can shed a bit more light on what it looks like. What does Black studies look like? Is there maybe a department or is there maybe a research group, and what kinds of things do you do? How is it shaped in your respective institutions? And then we have some follow-up questions about what we can do with it, but just begin by maybe touching on what it looks like in your specific institution or program that you belong to. We can start with, I guess, we can start with Motilola if you're okay with that.
Oh, sure. Okay. Well, thank you very much. So, at the University of Calgary, it's not a short story. It sort of began in the 1970s. There were a number, actually, I would say, of Africanist scholars in the departments of history, archaeology, anthropology, media studies, what have you, who were writing, doing work on South Africa, particularly the apartheid era and all of that. And so they were doing pockets of work around. And not long afterwards, for close to 20 years from that time, Dr. Caesar Pentic taught 2 courses in the African Studies program. Now, these courses tried to center some Black experience and, of course, also African studies in that way. But he couldn't do so much because he also had commitments to anthropology and international development studies. And he did this for these 20 years, organized a yearly group study program to Ghana and all of that. But 2020 came and that changed. 3 students decided to give up their summer holidays and sat in restaurants in downtown Calgary writing these documents and gathering signatures, wanting to expand and have more in terms of Black studies, in terms of African studies and all of that. And they did it. They won, I would say. The media got involved. The university could no longer look away. And that meant an expansion, a change that saw me join that team in 2022. Now we teach about 10 courses a year, focusing on things such as anti-Black racism in North America, Black and African diaspora, contemporary African issues. We have one on contemporary African media as well. As you can tell, that's very close to my heart, and all of those things. And since then, but in thinking of resources, it was the students who did this. And now they got these students, these 3, Ebenezer Belaney, Semha Abraha, and Sunit Abraha, secured funding from the Quality Money, Student Union Quality Money grant that paid 80%, they secured about 80% of the over $500,000 that they got to do this. And the Office of the Provost at the University of Calgary provided 20%. But what's very important here is that the students championed this. And really, when you're thinking about Black studies programming at the University of Calgary, you want to be thinking of the demographics, very, very important. In Canada, and according to Statistics Canada, since 1996, African immigrant population in Alberta has more than quadrupled. And that's very reflected in what happens at the University of Calgary. So we have domestic Black students, international students from the African continent and from other places who identify as Black, who want to hear their own stories. And of course, we'll go more into those in future questions. But this course in African Studies is housed in the Anthropology and Archaeology department as a way of trying to do that, to tell these Black African stories and all of that. So that's really what it looks like for now. Maybe I'll just keep it short and come back, maybe.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, because I was wondering, it being housed in anthropology, do you still see connections with other programs? Because I mean, like I said, it's not restricted to a particular program in most institutions. But do you think maybe U of C is more in your program than others? And do you see any sort of connection? Maybe you can touch that in 30 seconds.
Sure, yes. So while it's housed in anthropology, of course, it has connections to other programs. We do lots of historical things as well. So there's connections to history, there's connections to media studies, although administratively, and this is what I was told, it's housed in anthropology. But I suppose it also has connections to anthropology, and many archaeologists who work in Africa, for instance, see themselves in this program. Yeah.
Thank you. Alana, how's it like at Queen's?
Okay, so I think it's an interesting history. I think you make a really good point about how Black Studies doesn't necessarily begin with a formal program, but with the scholars. Yeah. So, but I'm going to talk about the kind of birth of like our very recent program. So the first thing I'd like to do is talk about Dr. Catherine McKittrick, who's basically founded the program at Queen's University. Now, what happened was Dr. McKittrick, I believe, coming from some equity reports that came, there were some systemic, obviously, issues around systemic discrimination, systemic racism. There were reports that were done over a period of 20 years. The most recent report was a principal's recommendation report to implement equity. And one of the recommendations was to start a Black Studies program. And so it's taken many years of reports and surveys and things like that before finally, it came to a head that they actually created the program. Now, this is a little bit of interest convergence because many of you remember the year 2020. Two things, COVID and George Floyd. So after George Floyd, the principal at the time of Queen's University made a very broad announcement about two things, hiring Black faculty and founding the Black Studies program. So here, Dr. Catherine McKittrick, who I hope she's seeing this, well, someone will tell her, someone will tweet her that I'm talking about her. But Dr. McKittrick had pushed for the program for 3 years. But again, as we know, with interest convergence, all of a sudden, because of George Floyd, we have the program. So that was something that was very exciting for us, that the principal said, this is something we're committed to do. And with that, we are going to hire faculty. So I believe there are about 7 faculty hires directly tied to the Black Studies program. So currently the Black Studies program is in gender studies. I am cross-appointed to gender studies. It's housed within that particular effective catalog. So right now, the program launched officially in 2022, and they have a Black Studies major, so you can take a degree, and a minor. So there is a major and a minor program that you're able to take. The catalog is a good opportunity because it basically allows students to take courses across different disciplines. So it's very interdisciplinary. There are many of the Black Studies faculty all over. So history, of course, which is foundational. I'm a history buff too. So history, Dr. Henry-Dixon, I believe you. History is a big thing. So history, of course, we have, there's obviously education, health, English, that's very important too, English literature, some amazing faculty. So just across the board. So it's been wonderful. There have been opportunities for research. Dr. McKittrick has also founded a Black feminist sort of research group that has emerged out of that too, which I'm very privileged to belong to. That is, it's basically a research group that is emerging. So right now they're in the process of looking at things like applying for grants and things to bolster that. But there are lots of opportunities. We do a lot of visiting lecture series. Just recently, I'm in education, obviously, but in my faculty, we were able to co-sponsor with Black Studies a lecture by Dr. George Day, who many of you have heard of from the University of Toronto, OISE in particular. So it's exciting to see that we actually have a program. So it's a very formal program in terms of a major and a minor. And it's growing and developing. So it's one of the things that I was reluctant, and I said this in my interview too, I was reluctant to go to Queen's University because I heard about the reputation and all the sort of challenges around equity and inclusion. However, I think that the Black Studies program has allowed me to feel welcome at the university and to feel like there's some hope or some progress being made in terms of equity and inclusion. So I really feel like it's kind of like made it more of a place for me, like to make me feel more included, that there's this program.
I mean, it's good you added those last points because I was going to push you a bit about Queen's reputation. I mean, it's one of the whitest institutions you can find in Canada. And I think it has that reputation. So I was curious about whether all of these initiatives really are making a difference right now. And like you said, you have a community now, so I guess it's a positive thing, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, definitely a lot of trepidation, and because I had read all the reports. So I came into the interview having read reports from the 90s about equity and inclusion. So it's really nice to see both in my faculty that there are efforts being made in terms of like EDI, but the Black Studies program, I think, is one factor that I can see that you can see that what they're doing in terms of programming, bringing students in, like recruitment of students, like we're getting great students, graduate students studying in our areas. Like I teach courses in critical theories, so I teach critical race theory, I teach about post-colonial theory, Fanon, so courses like that. And so we're able to get students who ordinarily wouldn't be able to be taught those subjects to be able to take courses in our program. So it's good.
Excellent.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll move to you now, Dr. Henry-Dixon.
Sure.
How is it like at York? I mean, York, we know York, but yeah, tell us more.
Yes, so at York University, we currently have not a program per se, but we have a Black Canadian Studies certificate program, and that's housed in the humanities faculty. And so this comprises of students needing to take about 24 credits of courses in order to obtain the certificate. So they can acquire this alongside with whatever majors and minors that they're taking. And so the certificate is structured in a way where there are a few core courses that students take, including my course, my third-year course in African Canadian history. And it's structured as well where there are, it's interdisciplinary. So there are courses in music, in the arts, in literature, cultures of the Black cultures of the Americas, the Caribbean history. So there are a number of courses that students take. And this came out of efforts of students years ago in the 90s, maybe even prior, but in the 90s when students were pushing for more solidification of some of the courses that we were taking. I was one of those students in the 90s taking African history courses. There was an African Canadian history course taught by Dr. Sheldon Taylor for a number of years. And so students were seeking some kind of formalization of those courses, which led to the certificate program. And then now there is an effort to actually structure a program. So we'll see how that turns out. And so the research and study and the teaching of Black Studies is also supported with at the Harriet Tubman Institute, the Research Institute, as well as CERLAC as well, another research institute. So those are other spaces as well for scholars and for students at York.
Excellent. I'll have a follow-up in the next question, so I'll come back to you on that. Cheryl, if you don't mind, tell us a bit more about how this looks like at TMU.
Well, I mean, I'll talk in brief about that because I think there's a different conversation that we could also be having, right? So because I don't really want to be a spokesperson for my university as it relates to their curricula, and the reason is because, and this is kind of to Alana's point, we assume that if you're in a smaller city, Kingston, they name these places that somehow we have a mindset that it's the small towns that somehow house the racism. As a person at a university in a large metro area, I can tell you it's here. It's in all of the universities. It's not just the small towns. Mm-hmm. So, TMU's particular Black Studies minor was an extreme challenge, extreme pushback in every corner, okay, extreme. That's the only way I can describe it. You had 3 persons, myself, 2 other faculty members in arts. So at the creative school, I was the only one. And then you had 2 faculty members in arts. And it was really Melanie Knight, who is in sociology at Toronto Metropolitan University in the Faculty of Arts, who wanted this, it was really her vision, she wanted this, right? To have a program that could be interdisciplinary, that could bring together multiple faculties. That was the whole point. Because we have a faculty of community services that houses social work and other disciplines that have always had a Black-centered focus, right? We know that of formerly Ryerson, that there's always been a Black-centered focus to the School of Community Services. And the same thing, we've had Caribbean studies for many, many years. So it's not as if we didn't have any Black courses. The idea of an interdisciplinary program was to make it truly across the faculties. Mm-hmm. So Faculty of Arts, the Creative School, Ted Rogers School of Management. Now we're in Faculty of Community Services, that students would be able to take courses across the curriculums of many different courses. And there was extreme pushback, especially from the creative fields. I think, I'm in the School of Performance. So I teach theater students, and I teach theater history, a little music history, a little dance history, a little acting history. I sort of teach in the performative arts. And we have a perception that the front of the stage looks like the back of the stage. Right? So the black dancer who's out there hoofing, okay? I think it's Sammy Davis Jr. hoofing for decades. Well, he didn't own anything. And it's kind of like that in academia, right? It's like we're out there in the front of the stage hoofing, soft shoeing all over the place, but we're not really decision makers. And so one of the challenges, and one of the things I want to bring up in this panel to maybe just to spur the conversation a bit, is to kind of think about what do we do with Black studies, whether it's a minor, whether it's a major, once it is housed at a university. How do we imagine it not being housed at a university? Like, how do we imagine the potential to taking it, yes, within, obviously we need it within an institutional bound to some extent, but how can we imagine it somewhere else? And how can we imagine our intellectual property also being used in a different capacity that doesn't just make these universities look good? Because the press release looks really good. And it sends a perception to the public that these are really progressive places to be and work. And I can tell you, as a Black woman at a university in Canada in the 21st century, many of these places are not progressive places to be and work. We are making it work because Black people, we invented the remix, and we invented the ability to take anything and make it popular. Am I right? I mean, I'm virtual, so I can't hear the audience, but it's that we can take anything and make it popular and make it what everybody wants. And so I'm trying to say in the 21st century, and listening to that earlier panel, I was really inspired by a lot of the things that I heard. It's like, how can we start to do that now as academics? Take anything and make it something else that these institutions can't even recognize, because it is so new and it is so out the box that they can't contain it. And I'm just putting that out into the space, because I really hope that we could also talk about the potentialities of Black studies outside of institutions.
Wow. Thanks so much. And I mean, that really leads us to the next question about what the future of this is going to look like. Because I mean, what does progress really mean, and what does it look like, right? And like you're mentioning, it probably shouldn't necessarily be thought of as something that is housed within an existing academic institution or infrastructure. But in this context, talking about Department of Black Canadian Studies or Black Studies, it seems to be typical that you would want to find it in a university setting. So now the question is the default assumption, or should the default assumption be Black Canadian Studies within an institution, an academic institution, or Black Canadian Studies department? So that's the question I'm asking. Like, what does the future look like to you, and what is the most feasible future that you see for Black studies in Canada? And possibly maybe the title of the department or the title of that sort of program could also have ramifications for what goes into it, who feels part of it, and who wants to commit any sort of resource to that endeavor. So it seems like a big question, but I don't know. Cheryl, do you want to go? Because you had really some good points. Maybe go first on this question.
You kind of hinted to what I was nodding when you said that, because it's true. It's like it's you know, life is kind of an amazing thing, because the minute you create something, it's contained. And then it comes with expectations within that containment. And then you're going to have people say, well, why didn't you think of this? Well, what about this group? Oh, it's only going to be this. Well, who's going to lead, right? And you know, as Black people of the diaspora, you know, one of the amazing things that comes with being part of a diaspora is that you have so many things you can draw on, so many languages, so many cultures. But then the challenge becomes, who leads? And in the 21st century, we like to think that we don't need a lead wolf. Well, in nature, they do. So I don't know why we think we don't. Somebody has to lead, and somebody has to kind of set the direction, right? And I think that's the challenge. And I think in Canada, we're faced with a particular challenge around that, because we don't have that sort of overarching identity of African Americanness or Africana-ness that they have in the US now, right? We sort of kind of resist that and say, no, we have a multiplicity of Blacknesses, that can exist within the nation that we want to call Canada. And within that multiplicity, why that becomes a challenge is like I'm saying, how do we convalesce on core ideas, core themes, core message, core naming? Because even the naming, I don't know how many people would want to be in an African Canadian Studies department or a Black Canadian Studies department. I don't know. And I think that's what I'm really trying to get at. Is like, is there a way that we need to start to think about our knowledges that are outside of the institutional framework, that maybe it is something else that we just can't see right now, outside of a traditional department at a university.
Thanks so much, Cheryl. I think I can have you go if you're ready.
Sure. And you can prompt me for the different parts of the question if you don't mind. And I like what Cheryl has said. And I think that is one of the tensions is, what should this look like? There are disadvantages and advantages to thinking or conceiving of Black Canadian Studies as a traditional department or seeing it spread out in different faculties and departments, as I think many are today. And then another thing to think about is, what do we want it to look like, and what would we want the outcomes to be? And I think looking at the traditional structure of academia, we would want to have access to the resources in order to support and nurture research, knowledge production, but then also to support whatever it is we might envision we want that outcome to be. And, some people, do we want it to look exactly like and replicate the same academia that we've been challenging and seeking to disrupt, or do we envision something different? And I think that something different should be closely tied to community. And some of the panelists in the first session talked about that. And I think that should be an important consideration as well in terms of how we conceive of Black Canadian Studies. And so I think that, just briefly, those are some of the things that I'm thinking about. Did I touch on?
Yeah, just maybe a bit about the limitations and possibilities. So if we conceptualize it in a particular way, what do you think could be the implications? You touched on it briefly, but I don't know if you have any additional thoughts, but we can come back to you on that if you want.
Just briefly, just to reiterate what Cheryl had said as well in terms of, how how academia can then want to use the work of Black scholars in order to look good and to look progressive. So there's that to think about. I think we also need to think critically about, in terms of our captured audience, our students. What is it that we want for Black students? But then also these courses are open to all students of the university. And so what do we do in terms of, or what do we think of in terms of the goals for students who are not Black? And so I think, those are just some of the things that I'm thinking about, and I can come back after.
Thank you. Alana, you can go.
Yeah, I really like what Dr. Thompson had to say about we need to reconceptualize what we think about with Black studies and sort of the scope and the, does it need to be housed in an institution? Now, I'm in education, and so one of the things that I think about when I looked at the question there about what does progress look like, I went through most of my undergraduate experience, and it was only really until I was a graduate student that I learned a lot of Black history. I think Black studies, like in terms of progress in education, Black studies needs to start at the elementary level. I don't think you need to wait till you get to university, then you learn about all these incredible, like, Dr. Henry-Dixon here has done an incredible work of creating websites and resources, and I think for teachers now, which is really amazing. But I think it needs to start earlier. So to me, Black studies needs to be infused in all levels of education as an embedded part of our curriculum. I have often been asked to speak about Black History Month. And you know this, right? You do all the, and I always say, like, we're Black all year round. Like, it's not just February that all of a sudden we learn about all these amazing, African, Canadian, and African American, and throughout the diaspora, scholars, achievements, all these things. These things should be embedded in our education. So to me, Black studies needs to be embedded in our science, in history, in English, from a very young age. It needs to be. So I don't think it should be a case where you go to post-secondary education to suddenly find out about Black studies. I think Black studies should be embedded in all levels of education, beginning with, the elementary school level. That's what I kind of feel like it needs to be really embedded.
Exactly. Yeah. Good point. Thanks.
Thanks.
Motilola.
Yes, thank you. I mean, in addition to everything that has been said, fantastic thoughts already, that it needs to start very early. But in thinking about the academy, the university, how do you imagine this? I was sitting with this question for a while because I was thinking, at the U of C, if you say that they shouldn't be that, then what is it going to look like? The resources, how would we get the resources to bring very important scholars to come speak to our students if we don't have something that they can work with, because this is what they understand, right? So at the African Studies program, for instance, we're able, and while we're not a major program and still working on the minor, because I am one of two, and actually carrying a lot more of the African Studies courses than my other colleague who has other commitments, I think maybe a sort of Black and African Studies center where we can have everyone pitching, and where we're not understaffed, under-resourced, where students can get the right kinds of things that they need. For instance, and I loved the first panel very much, the colleague that was speaking in Patois, I go to my classes sometimes and I say, what's in the shell, how far on a day? Because I just want to disrupt it, to say, there is something called pidgin, and it's such a beautiful language. How can you bring someone in, you're talking about African music, and I'm just playing these YouTube videos and talking about amapiano, and sometimes I see my non-Black students wondering, wait, what's that about? And you have a 1 hour, 15-minute class, and you're trying to fill in knowledge gaps, and you're trying to do that. And the Black students are clapping and waving, and the class is upside down, and I'm there standing. Well, what are we going to do now? I think we need more. It shouldn't just be one-offs where you just suddenly speak pidgin and it's like, wait, what's that? Or you hear during Black History Month that there was Violent King, for instance, who did amazing work, first Black female lawyer in this country, and all of that. We need something. And I was thinking about this question a lot. And I don't know what, because what would make us get these resources? I mean, I should also say in the same breath that there is lots of progress being made. A brilliant colleague at the University of Calgary, Dr. Bukola Salami, for instance, just secured a 2.5 million grant to look at transforming the lives of Black children and youth in Canada. That's phenomenal. She's housing in medicine, and I am in the arts, and I'm working on that. We have colleagues from all around. So if Black Studies were a department, would she be able to, teach on a course in our program and all of that? And will the university, because again, it's about giving credit. I know, of course, there's lots of unpaid labor that Black people have to do as part of what we do and all of that, but how do you then think about it for the sake of our students, as you were saying earlier? How will they benefit very much from this? I think, a department in addition to everything else would be great, so that we have multiple channels of resources. So I don't have to scratch my head when I'm explaining amapiano music. I can get and say, don't worry, we're having a special guest soon, and we'll get someone who will actually come do that, or talk about Nollywood and get a director, someone who sold out at the box office in West Africa to explain that, rather than painting abstracts and reminding me of my many science classes as a primary student in Nigeria, where I just imagined what a stethoscope looked like.
Exactly. I relate with that. Like you imagine so much because you don't have it, right? And you just imagine that you're talking about these things and you draw in them. and they're telling you how the body looks like, but you don't really have a body on the table to actually look at what a body could look like. So this is really interesting. I think most of you are probably saying that we should have Black Studies as sort of interdisciplinary program. So maybe this will probably be the last question. I see we have a few questions from the online folks, and we probably have questions from you guys. So this will be the last one about the interdisciplinary scope of Black Studies and what we stand to gain or lose. We could probably lose something, but we could probably stand to gain so much, right? So I'm just trying to see what you think about the scope. And I'm saying that maybe preface with me, like when I got hired here through the Black cohort hire, right? So I started at McMaster just 2.5 years ago, January 2022. So when the call came out and I was applying, I wasn't sure I should apply because there were a few sentences in there that suggested the person should be doing Black studies, the person should be doing Black diaspora studies. I'm probably doing all of that, but I didn't define myself like that. So I guess people are doing Black studies and not defining themselves in the same way that institutions or maybe departments or programs may be defining Black studies and what it means. And when you add Black Canadian, the Canadian in there could make a difference for someone who is looking at Black studies, but also doesn't feel like they're engaging with a Canadian experience, right, of Blackness. And so they don't feel like they belong to such a category of Black Canadian studies or Black Canadian programs. So I think how we define it really matters for the kind of interdisciplinary approach we want to take to Black studies. What do you think about interdisciplinarity? Cheryl, I see your hand up, so please go first.
Yeah, I mean, I have to jump in on this one because I was born interdisciplinarily, if that makes sense. It doesn't actually. You can't be born interdisciplinarily. I am an interdisciplinary scholar. I don't know what a discipline is. To me, what we have been so trained as intellectuals to think that we need to only see our field through one window on the 5th floor of the building. So you think because you're on the 5th floor and you got a view, oh, look what I could see. But you're on the 5th floor. You got to get up to the penthouse and get out, and then you could have that 360. That's what interdisciplinary work tells you to do. It tells you that you have one vantage point. That is all that you have. But if you just go up a little higher, and then you'll see that there's someone else on the 5th floor who lives on the opposite side of the building. And in that opposite side of the building, they have a view of a city dump, not the green fields that you've been looking at. And now you can have a completely different conversation about what it means to be, I don't know why I picked the 5th floor, but what it means to be on the 5th floor of that same building. So for me, we are Black people. Black people, we don't have one lane. No. We don't have one story. I'm also a person of Caribbean descent. My people are from Jamaica via Africa. I am so diverse in my genetic pool alone that I don't even have one story when I go back into my DNA. So why now, when it comes to studying, I'm going to say, I'm only going to study the 1960s and I'm only going to look at this. I mean, come on now. To me, that's Eurocentric thinking that we have adopted as people of African descent. And I'm not trying to, throw shade on anyone who is like that, but I'm only trying to tell you that is your Eurocentric education that has told you to think in a linear way and to follow a linear path. To me, the potentiality of Black studies is the embracing of interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary work and redefining it for ourselves. I mean, to me, that's really what I've been saying in all my comments. We need to start to redefine for ourselves, of ourselves, by ourselves, and we don't go to administrations to ask for support. We go to administrations and tell them what we're doing. And tell them, are you on board or aren't you? Like ultimatums. We need to start to ultimatum these people. And this is the last thing I'll say. I take this lesson from just studying a lot of like the 1960s civil rights movement in the US. What we don't see from all the mainstreaming of the civil rights movement is the reason why that movement was so powerful is because they threatened. Okay? They threatened force. They threatened to shut down the cafe. They threatened to shut down the school. They didn't come nicely and say, can we have lunch and talk about the Black Studies program? We'd like, no, they threatened. And so what I'm saying to you is that if we really want change, we want to get it done, Black people, we need to raise our tone and start to threaten these people about what we want and what we're gonna do unless they give us what we want. It's just that simple. And I know it's challenging if you're not tenured, you're worried about all that. I got you. I was in that position too. But in my framework, if we want to be free, this is the last thing I'm gonna say, if we want to be free, we have to start to act like free people.
Ah, nice. Man, I mean, those are powerful words. So Alpha, we're beginning some conversations here at McMaster. So threat is a good tactic for sure. And this also makes me feel less of an imposter, right? In this space of Black studies. So thank you so much for saying all that. Motilola, if you want to go.
Yeah, sure. Cheryl got us straight into activist mode right then. No, I'm still trying to stay calm in this seat. I think definitely interdisciplinarity is the way to go. What we would lose by not doing that is a lot more than what we'll gain. You can't even imagine that there's a new course at the University of Calgary's Faculty of Arts, Sociology of Blackness, starting this fall. I'm looking forward to that because I want to list that as one of the courses. Oh yeah, if you take this one, you should get a minor in African Studies as well. And how about our students? I think many times of myself as a teacher, and I go to class thinking, I hope I am doing service to these people who come here every week wanting to learn. If we think about that and our students and the fact that we want them to have a well-rounded education, then interdisciplinarity is the way to go. We want them to be able to take things away from here and there. And in thinking of Black studies and African studies, which is where I really sit more on, is to think about what's possible from medicine to social work to engineering, to everywhere, media studies, what have you. Those are the things, because all of these lenses are very important. What Cheryl was talking about in terms of ourselves, I go to class, and I'm sorry, I should end soon. In my African and Black diaspora course, I ask my students a question, and it's a writing reflection. Where are you from? I make them watch a video. Taye Selassie, who argues, don't ask me where I'm from. And it challenges some of my non-Black students, and they go, well, how can you say you're not from a place? And I say, well, do you want me to introduce myself? Do you want the long or the short version? Because we have multiple stories, and those stories make us who we are. I am here, but I thrive on the philosophy of Botho, for instance, when I lived in Botswana. That grounded me. I am, Ubuntu. I am because we are. I don't exist just in a vacuum. I exist because of the people around me, those who have gone ahead of me, those who have lit the way for me, the giants on whose shoulders I stand upon. It is because of the interdisciplinarity of their work, sometimes across various places, finding gems in impossible places. You might wonder, what can engineering tell us about Black studies? Lots. Many things. You think about medicine, social work. What can we learn from those places? A lot. How are Black children faring? How do you explain this? And when I teach anti-Black racism, I sometimes have to choke on my own tears and face my students as a brave professor, but also let them know how vulnerable I am in the face of all of this. I think these multiple lenses are crucial if we want to do service to the next generation, because it's on us. It's on us to do this job.
Thanks so much, Alana.
Wow, I think there were two hard acts to follow. But Dr. Thompson, that was a mic drop right there with what we need to do. Just a little story that doesn't relate to this. When I started at Cornell University, what was interesting was they gave us a story about the origin of the Africana study and Black studies. So in 1969, a number of Black students actually took over. It's called the Willard Straight Hall Takeover. You can Google this. So Black students basically stormed the building. They took up residence in the hall, demanding a Black studies program. And that's how they actually got a Black studies program. So I really like what you said, Dr. Thompson, about we have to go out there and do it. We don't need to ask permission. We need to actually do this. So I think it's so important to talk about the student voice and the students having a really good impact on this. But yes, interdisciplinarity, I don't know any other way to be. Dr. Thompson, I will tell you that when I started my position, there was a senior white male colleague who told me, you will not get tenure because your work is all over the place. You need to focus. You should have like your research should all be in one area. So I think those are things that we're told. And that, again, it reflects a very positivist sort of orientation towards academia that doesn't necessarily fit our research when we look at Black studies. So for me, of course, I think there's Black, as far as I'm concerned, like there's Black studies in everything, right? Like the Black studies looking at, in business, it's important, looking at health science, every single discipline or field you can think about Black contributions, and also how every sort of field differentially affects the Black population. Every field has different impacts based on, we are in a context of anti-Black racism. What does that mean for all these different fields and disciplines, right? So I think that I don't really understand that there's any other way to be. So that was my tenure file. It was like, I defended myself. Dr. Thompson, I was like, this is why I do this research and that research. It's Black studies in all these different areas, so yeah.
I mean, I so relate because I'm political science trained, and in political science is so strict. You have to follow these kind of strict methodologies. You have to be in a specific field, and I get told, no, this is a bit all over the place. And the worst thing they will tell you is so eclectic. It's like it's a bad word, right? And it's like,
Scattered.
why are you all over the map? And so you have to justify and keep justifying. But I think it's part of the disciplining process. The whole idea we call it a discipline is because it's a new, like you're being beaten, right? Basically to follow a particular path.
Right,
And if you're not
exactly.
following it, then you are out of that scope. So anyway, that's just a tangent, but I'll let you go.
Yes, yeah, and quickly, I know for time, I concur that, Black studies should be interdisciplinary. Its early conceptualizations was based on interdisciplinarity, and so it's important for us to continue in that regards, because as we seek to understand and to improve Black life and Black liberation, we have to better understand how these different facets of society modeled through these disciplines impact Black life. And so I think that that's really important. And as well, that it's, even though what we're part of the academy, that again, we are disrupting the structures of colonial institutions and Western knowledge production, that we are not siloing our knowledge into these disciplines, but doing things differently. And that is and should be part of the definition of Black studies.
Thanks so much. I mean, this was fire, wasn't it? Hand of applause. So I think at this point, we just have about 10 minutes. So we're going to open it up to questions. And I know you probably had reflections on other questions as well. So you can try to insert that in your responses if possible. I know we have some questions online. So we tend to exclude online folks sometimes. So maybe let's start with online questions. And then we can take a few from here if you don't mind reading those.
Sure. Hello, I'm going to read one of our online questions from Blessing. He says, yeah, with an exclamation mark. Commitment is a problem we have with Black studies. How sustainable are the commitments we have gathered in the past 4 years? How can we keep our allies committed to Black studies?
Can we take a few more and then we can have the... Okay, lots of hands. We can take maybe 4, and that should be... So first come, first serve, maybe?
Thank you very much. It has been a very interesting one. And it particularly piqued my interest because I don't work in Canada, I'm from South Africa. And a few things resonate very well with what happens on the other side. Particularly because we have issues around decolonization that we've been discussing over the last few years. And I think this relates very well to the issue of decolonization. But then, in terms of having something like this as a department, I love the idea, but we have to address a systemic limitation before we go into it. And the systemic limitation starts from the fact that when a problem is multi-pronged, we will be wasting our times to try to address the problems by providing answer from a singular discipline, so to speak. And the systemic limitation is the fact that we have often discussed Black studies, etc., around social sciences and humanities. with professors of engineering, sciences, etc., claiming they could not locate the idea in their disciplines. And when I looked at this program and the panelists, a quick analysis of the panelists suggested that the speakers are mostly in the area of humanities, arts, and social sciences, which could also suggest to me that the problem we have on that side is perhaps also present on this side. And if we must address it from an all-encompassing perspective, how do we start to not only create a department that addresses a problem from one angle, but one that addresses the problem from a multi-pronged perspectives that the problems perhaps emanated from initially. Thank you very much.
Excellent point. A few more questions. Two at the back and then one here.
I guess I have to stand up for this. Listening to you, I was starting to think that maybe we're thinking small. So my question to you is, why can't we start our own university?
That's good points.
I love that question. And my question kind of builds off on that. I'm thinking about Black studies. I'm thinking about for us, by us. I'm thinking of our own power. I'm also thinking of contemporary times where we're seeing pro-Palestinian organizing, where we're seeing communities raise hundreds of thousands of dollars through mutual aid fund, where we're seeing these temporary liberation zones popping up where people are caring for each other, loving for each other, providing for each other without necessarily getting lost in capitalism and monetizing it. So I think we can dream big. I think we can dream very big. I don't know if it's about starting our own university or just creating a space for our own studying, where I'm thinking of what the folks said in the other panel around, like, what does a methodology look like, where it's not just about learning about community, but learning with community, thinking with community, and pouring into community simultaneously as we're learning. So while I hear the resources are a barrier, right? While I hear the opportunity or possibility for bringing this scholarship around the world and bringing scholars from around the world to speak, I also think there are theorists and scholars already in our community that could speak. So I guess my question is just around what could it look like to dream big? What could it look like to create our own Black studies where we don't have to threaten people, where we don't have to negotiate with folks, but where we are in charge? And can we sit with that idea a little bit and move past the barrier that lack of resources might create, and think through resources rather than stop at resources?
Okay. So I'm being generous by asking the last two to speak, but please be brief and very specific with your questions.
Yeah, thank you very much for the enlightening conversations. I want to go back to a question that I think Dr. Cheryl raised, where she said, what is the department, for example, going to be named as? Is it African Canadian Studies? Is it Black Canadian Studies? And she asked the question, she said, well, how many people will want to work there? And I think it piqued my interest because I studied in America. I'm at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And the first time I knew about Black studies in Canada was from a course on Black studies generally. And I think there is something to learn in thinking about the agility of global Blackness instead of the balkanization in itself. I love Kitchener McKittrick. I love Sylvia Winter. As a matter of fact, my family started living here, so I've been on a fellowship. I'm just completing my dissertation. And the more I study, I just take some time to read about things happening, to see the dynamics of Black studies in Canada. Not just investing my time alone on Black studies in Canada, but thinking about the connections and intersections. And I think if we are really dealing with interdisciplinarity and the question of naming, what will that kind of department be? That's one. The second part of it is this. I would think a graduate studies program is very rare in Black studies in Canada. I think I've checked and I've checked and I've checked. But from my experience, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, we have an African Cultural Studies department that attracts students doing global Blackness, at least 3 of them every year. Recently, I still went back to America. We did a movie screening. The
10 more
community one.
seconds.
Yeah, the community one, because you're thinking about community. We did a screening of the first animated series from Africa on Disney. People from the community came to the university and we had a producer. That is one of the ways to connect, but that was only possible because we had this grad studies program that has that kind of agility to think about global blackness generally. So are we not limiting if we are really thinking in terms of balkanization in naming the department and all of those? Thanks.
That was like a minute, but that's okay. Let's just take that question over here and maybe one more online and then one last one at the back. I've seen your hand for a while, so I'll let you go as well. So please, quick one, 30 seconds, please.
Yeah, thank you all for the talk. I just wanted to make it brief. How about decolonizing the education? Because I see education is part of the problem of many countries. The British system of education need to be decolonized for us to be free. Because it's really part of the problem. Like, I'm from Sudan, and I think this is one of the problems that really affected Sudan for ages. So how about decolonizing education and see something different?
Yeah. Thank you. One question at the back, and then we'll take the online question, and that is it.
Yeah, thank you. So thinking about these concepts of transdisciplinarity and solidarity with Indigenous peoples on Turtle Island specifically, is there room for a Black Studies department or whatever the name will be, or the institution? I mean, First Nations University in Canada isn't a great model, but there is one there. And so are there conversations about collaborations or inclusion of Indigenous studies with Black studies, especially for our Indigenous and Black students, Black Indigenous students?
Okay. Alpha. So, I mean, this means that we're probably eating into your lunchtime a bit, so you'll be probably having lunch for 30 minutes.
That's okay. This is lunch too. And I think these questions are not just for the panelists, they're for all of us to be thinking about and through and continuing the conversation. So I'm glad we're able to create some space to hear them. This is from Jacqui online. Is it reasonable to even hope for one defined meaning or understanding of Black studies? Is it even possible for us to think that there can be a communal, flat governance of the construction of Black studies as an interdisciplinary program? Or should Black studies be left to be designed and interpreted by each discipline? But then how will we sell it as a program when it has no real home?
Oh my goodness. Well, lots of questions. I mean, it's almost impossible for you to address all of them, but just deal with whatever you can deal with right now based on what you think you have thoughts on. So maybe 1 minute each. Cheryl, you are on fire. Please go.
Questions lit a flame. But let me just say this. I'm actually going to keep it short and sweet. You know, many years ago, I was walking downtown Toronto. I can't remember if I had a grill on. I don't know. My face looked funny. Rastaman said, "Hey, what's wrong?" I can't remember what I said. And he said, "You know what? Ute, if you have the question, you have the answer." The most ingenious summation of reality I have heard in my how many years of post-secondary education. The problem with us and everything I'm hearing, we're asking the question, we have the solution, but
oh my goodness.
everyone has just said in a question was actually an answer. So the real issue is, how do we foster that ability to what I would call Harriet Tubman this situation? Because she didn't sit around with all her fellow enslaved people talking about, oh, one day we'll be free. She just did it. She just said, it's time to run. It's time to go. She did it. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't know what the infrastructure looked like, to all the questions about the naming and who's this. She didn't know any of that. She trusted that she would find allies on the way, because there are allies who are not identifying as Black who want to support us in the mission. They're there. She trusted. She trusted when she got north. She didn't know what the north was going to be like, that she would survive. We have to lean into our ancestral knowledge. People, we have it. We know Black people, all Black people have it, that ancestral voice that tells you you're going to be just fine. And we need to start to take all our ideas and put it into an action plan. So I'm volunteering myself. You heard it here. At this conference, I am volunteering myself to be part of this mission to put all of these ideas to convalesce into something. And I'm here to tell you, it does not have to be housed at a university. We have to think big. To all of our brothers and sisters who work in the business world, who love to give their money to all these philanthropic activities. Hello, Black Studies needs your money too. So I'm ready. I put the call out. I'll leave it to everyone else to take me up on my offer.
Thanks so much. We will surely take you up on that one. So please go ahead and respond to it in a minute or so, however best you can.
Well, I'll just add a bit briefly in terms of, I think a question I'm paraphrasing around how to do Black studies, that there are and there have been practice models that we could look to, and this was talked about earlier as well, and that we also need to try different things as well to see what works and what not, and the context will vary as well from space to space. But I think the important thing is that we are taking the action and that we're doing things. And I think it's important that our practice is, and I mentioned this earlier, that is closely connected to community, thinking about our service to young people, to young Black children, that we are creating that kind of pipeline and that support for Black students throughout, and having that model closely tied to community. One of the things that I do in my history classes is that I ensure that my students do work connected to one of the smaller Black museums or archives, because that's important for them to see that these are the roots and the origins of some of the work that we're doing in the academy. It doesn't happen in the academy alone, but for them, we wouldn't have, right, a lot of that work to do. And then something to think about as well, the question posed about creating our own institutions, which would be great. It has been done before in the past and done more contemporarily as well. I think some of the things that we have to grapple with is how much social mainstream white validation are we seeking in the work that we're doing? Are we okay being on our own? I was okay starting a school for Black children, but then I always got parents being so concerned about the curriculum, the Ontario curriculum, and how does it fit into this, and how does it fit into that? And so they then became so concerned with fulfilling the mainstream ideas, and these are things, yes, to consider, but then that becomes something that stymies the efforts. And then quickly as well, should we even have this school? Instead of saying that we need an alternative space for Black children, whether or not I decide to send my kids there, that's not the issue, that it's available for us as a community because some of our community felt that it was important. And then how do we support that going forward? I think that, so we have to think that we can do many things, and it doesn't have to be all for us, but it could be support us in our pursuit of liberation and freedom. And then lastly, in terms of spaces for us to think and consider and work through some of these things, that was the idea of the establishment of the Black Canadian Studies Association. And so how much are we supporting and leaning into that space and creating other spaces in order for us to kind of think through these things and take, again, multi-pronged approaches.
Thank you. So there was a question really about decolonization and how systemic limitations really stop us from being as interdisciplinary as we want. So for instance, STEM is not necessarily represented in this conference in terms of panels and who is speaking, right? So I don't know how we can address it, but I just wanted to flag that because it's an important element of really truly being interdisciplinary. You can go ahead, yeah.
Sure, okay. The STEM part piqued my interest. I would say that in thinking about this, while those disciplines perhaps traditionally haven't had to respond to these questions, I think more and more you're finding Black scholars, African scholars, now responding to those. I mentioned Dr. Bukola Salami earlier. She's in medicine, she's a nurse by training, but she's doing lots of work that I would say that's African Black studies and all of that, because she's very interested in this. I have colleagues in social work, of course. That's still not the STEM that you're looking for right there, but I think that there are many ways, and I believe it's also what my colleagues have been mentioning, that it's how we start, how we take up those spaces, how we show up, maybe sometimes with our headgears, colorfully, knowing that we are here. And while it would have been fantastic to have our own universities, so we don't even have to deal with all of this to start with, because we'll know that's what's there. What we have now is what we're trying trying to deal with. And in dealing with those, I would say taking up those spaces, doing what we're doing intentionally, and knowing that we're doing this not just for now, but for the future, in thinking about the question on indigenous peoples and their stories. You know, I'm currently teaching this spring Introduction to African Studies, and I have some indigenous students in my class, and they were telling me when I was speaking about religion and respect for elders and ancestors and all of that, and this woman told me, you know, it's like you're talking about what I know. And for a moment I thought, so why is it always that we're sort of indigenous studies here, African and Black studies there? And I think more and more we need to come together, because many of these stories very similar. And if we're trying to do decolonial work, then perhaps we need to be doing those, from the groups that have been so marginalized, and keep taking up spaces and telling those stories.
Thank you. Alana.
Well, I feel like everything that we talked about, and I think the young Sudanese lady who mentioned a question about colonization. I think we hear it as every institution talks about this all the time. You see it in literature, and it has now become a buzzword. But the question that I always ask is, what do we mean by decolonization? And so I think that we need to situate Black studies as one of those, as an area that can be situated within decolonization. It's part of the decolonizing project. So it doesn't have to look a particular way. It doesn't have to be particular individuals who necessarily have PhDs under their name. There's so much wealth within our community. And I think too, we need to draw on our strength in our community. As you mentioned, the ancestors, we have so much cultural wealth within our communities that we do not draw on. And I think that's really important to think about when we look at the decolonizing project, and who is a scholar and what does that necessarily look like. I think we need to transgress some of that and unpack some of that. Like some of us know, some of the wisest people we know are the least educated, right? Formally educated. You have your grandma, like the lessons you learned from that grandmother or the grandfather, those teachings are so foundational. Right? So how can we draw on those kinds of knowledges and think about that, and not necessarily think about Black studies as fitting in a particular model, but the decolonized model, which looks at community cultural wealth, looking at what do we know about our history, and how can we draw on that? How can we draw on all those different varied resources that we have? So I don't really like being the last word, because I think Dr. Thompson is the best person to be the last speaker, but there we go. I'm a real fan. I'm such a fan of hers, by the way. She did a Black history for our Queen's University. It was amazing, but yes, I'm sorry you're not here,
She's
Cheryl.
wonderful. I mean, this shows the 1 hour is not enough for a conference panel, but we have tried, and I think my panelists did a fantastic job. Please, a round of applause for them. And thank you, Dr. Thompson, for joining us online. And thank you all for staying through this panel. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you very much. A lot of talking points. You can help us document and share the conversation as we go on Twitter by using hashtag Black Futurities 2024. And then you can tag at ABLD McMaster. Thank you very much, panel 2 and Dr. Andrews, for the illuminating discussion on the current and future direction of Black Studies departments at Canadian universities. In the course of the conversation, I was just trying to have one keyword, and then I just keep writing keywords and keywords. I just want to share a few. The things that stood out for me said, you will need to be Black all year round. You can't be Black for a particular period. We need to do more because we need more. And very importantly, because I like coming up with theories, some of us know that here. So I'm already thinking about a theory now, which is going to be the fifth floor versus the penthouse discourse. We'll probably look forward to that. And if you want to be free, act like a free person.